Hey team, so welcome back. We're back in this little remote work office at home, and so far so good. I had a bit of a rough weekend, but it's you get through the week of like getting through all the things you got to do every day, and then you hit the weekend and it's like and just you dig into a little too much news and social media and what have you, and it gets all a bit full on. Anyway, we're back. It's another week. So I thought we'd start the week with a great conversation that I was lucky enough to have with an executive producer here in Paris by the name of Emily Walmsley, working out of a company called Chez Eddy in the center of Paris, and talked a little bit to her about managing certain boundaries between work and personal life, and being professional while still being a parent, which I think in this particular reality that we're all dealing with can be challenging. So have a look, see what you think. I certainly find it interesting. I hope you will too. Have a great day. So hey Emily, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much, Heath.
Thanks for making the time to do this, especially with this crazy corona-ness, right?
It's pretty insane.
Yeah.
We will have to say that. It is a different situation than we've ever experienced.
Yeah. So I want to start just by giving a brief introduction to you, who you are. So please, of course, correct me if I'm wrong. Based on my little digging around on the internet, you studied at University of Kent and the University of Bath, both in politics and sociology, and you got your master's in European political culture. Correct?
Correct.
Yay! And you've had over 16 years experience as a producer in the UK and in France, obviously, where you are now. And if that's not enough, you also have an incredibly successful blog by the name of Babyccino, where you write posts and create live events such as the shop-ups in Paris and the UK.
Exactly, that I co-own with two of my very good friends.
Yeah, so you're one of three founders, right? Not just a contributor, but also one of three founders. So I would imagine that makes you a pretty busy person.
Yeah, throw a couple of kids in and trying to find the right work-life balance. It does make quite a full life.
Yeah, and you're currently a producer at Chez Eddy in Paris, is that correct?
Yeah, an EP over there, yeah.
You mostly focus on commercials and music videos and things like that, or do you do long format as well?
A little bit of everything. I would say content production in general,
right.
As opposed to developing our own IP. So anything that comes in as an offer and needs a director attached to it, I think the market is changing quite a lot. So the idea of just commercial doesn't really exist anymore as such.
Okay.
But anything that is produced for a client falls into my job description.
Okay, so it's like content that maybe is focused on storytelling around a brand or content.
Exactly. So I think the world of commercials is changing a huge amount, and a lot of it is actually telling stories around brands and a lot of narrative content, and it can be very short or it can be now also much longer pieces. Making content for TV shows or films, all of that still falls under content production.
Oh, okay. So was that like pre-production stuff or pieces
Everything, because again, everybody needs content now in general. Animation is a thing that works very well for that. And so it can be pre-production, but it can also be producing full pieces. A lot of documentaries now use animated sequences within them.
And do you have on staff in-house animators, or do you work with freelancers?
We mostly work with freelancers. We're very lucky in France to have such a massive pool of freelancers that we can source from. And as every single production is different and has a very different style, it is better for us and actually also better for the animators around Paris and actually around the world to be able to start them up individually by project. And our projects are often from, I would say, between 2 months to sometimes a year. So it depends really what kind of production we have and how we grew up for that.
So I mean, that must be quite a human resources challenge for you though, as well, like tracking what, sort of your preferred artists or the correct artists for each job are doing currently, or are they available, not available? How do you manage that?
Well, to be honest, that's actually, I would say, the most fun part of the job is actually always discovering new talent, being able to go and to schools, see graduating shows, and be able to see what people are bringing out in the world. I mean, a lot of the time of the producers I work with is spent trawling the internet and finding short films and finding the credit list of those short films and seeing who's around and how these films were made so that we can maybe source some of that talent for future productions.
Okay. Cool. So I think that kind of establishes, well, for me anyway, establishes the scope of kind of like what you have been doing and what you're doing, which is very impressive. But I just wanted to, like, before I ask a couple of pre-prepared questions, I want to ask you a little bit about the role of executive producer. Because obviously I mentioned producer at the beginning, you correctly reframed that as executive producer. I feel like there's a lot of titles being thrown around now between whether it's production manager, producer, executive producer, showrunner, like how would you describe like
Now,
specifically your role?
and it's a very good question because on every type of production, the roles are different and yet the titles somehow stay the same.
Right.
So for a production company the size of Eddy or other kind of smaller production companies, the role of the executive producer is the person who mostly supervises several jobs. Every job normally has a producer attached to it that does the day-to-day business, which
Mhm.
I guess on bigger productions is more of a line producer's job.
Right.
And for us, it's a producer because it involves different roles from staffing up to doing the pre-production, the production, and the post-production. So that's why we call those guys and girls producers. And the EPs kind of oversee all of that and are very much in contact with the different people that we work with, the different companies that we are associated with. And I guess more involved in the top line aspects of the production, finding the right directors, making sure that the budgets are sorted, and then being able to kind of like fly in and find solutions where there might be something on different productions. So at any one time, I would say I kind of oversee 4 to 5 productions to which then a producer is associated to. But
Right.
at the same time, I'm also working on the strategy of the company, on developing the roster of the company, and kind of seeing what other opportunities are out there.
Yes, that's a pretty big role. So there's definitely a strategic overview. There's a client-facing aspect, which that must be quite challenging at times too. And then the managerial side of it, like managing like all the moving parts of the day-to-day. That's a big role. So there's a lot of multitasking in there. Would you have any kind of advice to give anybody who was considering making that jump, or things to look out for?
I think you need to enjoy being with people.
Yeah, right.
I think it's a very people facing job. I really enjoy doing a lot of things. And that's why it's a role I think that specifically suits me because I can kind of slip in and out of different roles and see kind of what's going on while not having to concentrate on one and hone in on one specific skill.
Right. Yeah, the jack of all trades thing, I can totally relate to that. Well, also that actually reminds me of something. I mean, obviously we've known each other for a long time, but one thing as well that I think people, especially now that I work with a lot of North American companies, kind of forget is that a lot of people in Europe speak multiple languages. And I think you're a great example of that. You speak 3 languages fluently, like German, Italian, Italian, you speak Italian fluently, German, French, and English.
Yeah.
And it's, that's a lot. And from a cultural point of view, I know for me, learning to speak French was a big shift for me to understand where I came from and where I was now living in France. How about for you, like growing up speaking 3 different languages in Europe? How does that, position you culturally as well? Because you seem to have a great understanding for the Anglo-Saxon culture, the European culture, like French culture, and I guess that kind of empathy that comes with it must be very helpful with the job you have.
I think I was very lucky in the way I purely by chance grew up within a huge amount of different cultures. then again, I mean, a lot of them are European based. So I'm half French, half Irish. I grew up in Germany, in the US, and then I lived in the UK for a long while. And now for the first time I live in a country I actually have a nationality to. And so I think I'm very lucky with that. It's been very interesting throughout my career. I think a lot of them, I have kind of taken advantage of coming from all of these different cultures, because I often see myself as a cultural interpreter, because in the animation industry there's a lot of countries working together, a lot of cultures working together, and jobs coming in from different countries. And I do spend my time often explaining to people what other people mean or how to interpret an email, because a lot of things do actually get lost in translation.
Yeah, sure.
And it's important to be able to keep that hat on and know what people are trying to say and why they're saying it, to be able to then work well with people.
When I was doing a bit of research about you online, I saw an article you'd recently written on Babyccino, and there's just a couple of things that I really would like to sort of unpack with you today. And the first one is, you mentioned in your article about going back to work for parents, I guess, and specifically mothers going back to work. You mentioned don't try and pretend you don't have a family. And I think that's such a powerful message, like especially currently with everyone working remotely and working from home. I think it's such a powerful message to have the courage to sort of just accept, this is how things are, and don't pretend.
Yeah, it's been an interesting one, because it's something I realize I'm very passionate about that, because I think, we all need to find ourselves in a place in families and in work. And I think especially for women, it often is the case that they need to really work hard to find that role, and often try very hard to ignore the fact that they have families and almost make up for it and try. And I think that's very sad, because I think in the end our society needs children. Therefore, people need to be parents. And I think, especially in our industry, I think we're very fortunate that I myself am very fortunate to work in an industry that's, quite tolerant and flexible and young. And I think especially there, from now, I think it's very important from the get-go to establish that you indeed have a family. Now, in no ways, and we need to also break the presumption that that means that you're a worse worker.
Right.
Right. I think we're all very capable, if companies support us, to be a very good professional whilst having a family at home. I don't see how that can be seen as a negative, and it's something that companies need to encourage, because if people are encouraged to work in healthy circumstances, people thrive. And so the important thing is making sure that your employees thrive, because your business is going to take advantage of that. And I think for the longest time, once I started going back to work, I was trying to basically prove that I was as good as I had been before, which I don't think I should have had to prove. And I think I should have, and I think if I had from the beginning worked in with an attitude of saying, these are my conditions, but that will make me a better employee, that would have been a much healthier way of approaching it.
So can I ask you, and again, feel free to say no if you don't want to sort of dig into this, but can I ask you, was that an external pressure, or was that an internal pressure from you?
I think the problem is that it is very much often an internal pressure, but it comes from external ideas, right?
Right.
So often, if employer has a confidence to say to you, take it easy, how do you want to structure this?
Right.
It gives you then the possibility to find a way of working. Well, if that is not offered as an employee because you're working for someone, often you will try and create a situation that you think the employer wants.
Yeah,
I think it's very much a give and take. And, in the end, if you do have the possibility to be able to say, these are the hours I'm working, I think in the end, if you look at Scandinavian countries, it's such a normal thing that it doesn't even get discussed there. And, and these are my priorities, but for this, I will make these and these concessions. And I think especially in 2020, and as we're realizing now for the last 2 weeks, we all have, or the people in our industry at least, are lucky enough to have internet, to
Yeah,
have mobile phones. And I feel like all of this new technology, which gets criticized a lot and for good reason, can also be used to our advantage.
for
And we
sure.
should take it and make it our advantage. I do have a mobile phone. I can be reached 24/7 by my employer, but that should also mean that I can then have much flexible working hours. And be able to structure my day around that. So I think there has to be, these kind of technologies should not be something that we become slaves to, but something that makes our lives simpler.
Right. So, how hard was it for you to establish boundaries with your employer? Did you have to really force your hand? Did that take time? Did it
I
come
had
naturally?
to quit a job, take some time to think, and then start a new job on a good basis.
Wow. Okay.
Because I realized that the life I was living in my former job was just not sustainable. And I actually had to take a break,
Mm,
reassess how I wanted to work before I went back to a job where I felt like I could actually, work the way that I thought was sustainable on the long term.
right. Wow. Well done. It's a very courageous thing to do. Most people don't bother actually.
No, and I have to say also most people can't do it, but I'm very, very fortunate to be living in France where there was enough of a social structure around that I was able to do that and had the freedom to take that time out, which is
Right.
not possible for a lot of other people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We're quite lucky in France. Um, okay, which that's I took some notes actually while you were talking. The other thing that you mentioned was the idea of being 24/7 on call with with technology. That also must be a challenge, right? Of putting up like a structure and boundaries so that people are not especially with a role like yours where you could potentially have things coming from all angles, right?
Yeah, and I think you always have to reassess that. Again, I'm noticing these last 2 weeks that I've had to recalibrate a lot and figure out how to create those spaces and those breaks. And by
Mm,
no means have I found the right solution yet. But do think that we can empower ourselves to control that
yeah, right.
and to make it work for us. Again, we've all suddenly shifted to this home working environment, which for somebody like me who needs to have people around him is quite difficult. But again, it shows how this is quite a powerful tool, and how we need to then set our own boundaries to be able to make it work. But for somebody who has a family, often it means that I stop earlier, I spend time with the family, and then in the evening I can log in again, and that's a massive freedom, especially considering I often work with countries like Australia and the US. It does mean that I can be open for those times, but then also have the freedom to take time off in the day.
Right. Yeah, yeah. That's that's still an impressive amount of stuff to juggle, I have to say. So when you said you just mentioned that someone like you that needs to have people around, is that something you feel like is an asset in your job as well? The idea of being a social person, like enjoying people's company.
Yes, absolutely. Because through conversations, again, if you're kind of managing teams, managing creatives, managing clients, the fact that you can smile and crack a joke will always put people at ease.
Right. Diffusing tension.
And I mean, that's an important skill, I guess. And that's
For
a skill I
sure.
enjoy having. So,
Okay, and so
works for
then
me.
the next thing I wanted to talk about, in the same theme, and also from the same article actually that you wrote, you mentioned the idea of not taking on the role of mum/parent at the company.
Mm.
So, how do you manage that?
I think again that was also a big learning experience. I realized that naturally, as I am a mom at home,
Mm,
um, I was, especially with younger colleagues, put into that category, and I needed to be careful not to be that muddly role because I'm also the boss. So I needed to, like, I mean, it's really stupid things. For example, of not bringing in cookies we baked at home for everyone. You know,
right, 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 right.
Hilariously enough, if my male colleagues do it, it kind of works. For me, I had to put these barriers down of
Yeah,
not bringing those kind of issues into the office. And yet it's a very fine balance, isn't it? Because on the other hand, there will be moments where I have to go because of dentist appointments or because teacher appointments and stuff like that. But that's a very different thing than bringing that that role of a caregiver into an office where in the end you're also in a professional environment.
Yeah, I really I'm a strong believer in that defining that line between what is acceptable in the workplace and what is personal life. Two
Yeah,
separate things.
but I think for me it's also more that something for myself than
Mm,
necessarily for my colleagues. It's more for me to know that in this place I am that person, right? Because in the end we all have those two hats to wear, and it's important to leave one hat at home and another one at the office. So it's even possibly more of a psychological thing for myself than necessarily what people were imposing on me.
but I like the way you've unpacked this idea of I'm not disguising the fact that I'm a mother outside of the office. Like that's part of my life. I have to go because I have parent teacher meetings or whatever it is. I have issues to sort of deal with. But that doesn't mean that I have to be everyone's mother at work, which I think it's a subtle thing, as you said, but it's such an important boundary to set, right?
It is, yeah. And it's interesting because again, all of these are learning progresses. You know, it's thing that I hadn't even thought about 10 years ago that I'm suddenly also starting to notice now. And in a funny way, I think that's why it was actually very important to kind of stop a job, think, and restart.
Okay.
Because in the end, I was able to restart on a different basis. And I'm also very lucky to have, employers who are very open to people working in different ways.
So to continue down that sort of train of thought or line of thought, so with the situation with the coronavirus, obviously in Europe and everywhere else in the world, how are you managing that with remote work and people working outside the studio? And maybe that's not such a difference for you because you are working with freelancers, but how are you managing that sort of parent-employer role? If people are struggling with this shift and change, and it is something that's a personal issue, right? If you're struggling with a routine, if you can't get your act together, your home situation is perhaps not perfect for working from home. Where's that line where you're responsible, not responsible?
Well, I'm very much responsible for my team hanging on in there. So I'm very open. My door's always open for people to also vent
Right,
and
right.
open up their grievances. But that doesn't mean that I will, I think that's the thing, that I will not personally let myself be affected by that.
Right. So there's a psychological, mental well-being
Yes.
that's an additional management challenge, and then there's the logistical stuff, right?
Exactly. So there's that. And then I think logistically, it's been, I think we've all noticed it. Everything is taking 2 hours longer, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point.
And I think that's just something that we all need to give in, that we will just get less done because everything takes more time.
Hmm. Yeah, this idea of establishing the new norm, and if your level of productivity was here, maybe it's here now, but as long as that's consistent, then it's okay.
Yeah, and I mean, a couple of the big companies have actually sent emails to their employees saying, listen, we know you're not going to be as productive,
Yeah.
and that's okay. I think is that kind of thing is taking a lot of pressure off people because we all need to hear it. And as long as everybody does their best, that should be okay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's something that, it's something that's really important to message to everybody. It's just like, it's okay if you're not as productive as you are at the office because things are, crazy on a psychological level and a logistical level. So that's great. And you're right. Everyone needs to hear that. That's a really good point. Is there anything that you wish that I'd asked you or you wanted to talk about? Or do you think we've covered a broad scope of things?
I think we've covered a broad scope of things.
Excellent. And lastly, where can people find you online? Where's the best place to find you? If they want to ask you questions or get in touch with you or...
I think mostly LinkedIn, actually.
Okay.
I think that's the easiest way. It's we all use it a lot. And it's a kind of system where professionally we can all connect quite well.
Okay. Well, listen, thanks so much for making the time. It's been a really interesting conversation. And take care and stay healthy and well.
Speak to you later. Thank you very much.